Hey everyone, welcome back uh, to Games Week lesson number 2. I did take the first quiz for the first lesson and I got a 90%. It was pretty easy. Um, so we have moved on to lesson number 2. I do want to remind you guys, I am not a professor for this site. I am not the one who wrote this lesson. I am simply the one making the video and helping those who need it. Nothing more, nothing less. All right. So lesson number 2 is titled Leisure in the Afterlife. Good morning, class. I'm glad to see all of you back here so bright and early. You may have noticed already that your desks have been pushed together. The person you are sitting with is your opponent for our 2 games that we'll be covering today. What games are we covering? Wizard's Chess is a good answer. However, we will go over that later this week. The 2 games we're talking about today are the 2 oldest board games in history, the Royal Game of Ur and Senet. The Royal Game of Ur is the oldest board game that we have discovered a complete set of. Its origin traces all the way back to the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia. I can see that there are a couple of ancient studies enthusiasts in this class. Great. This complete set of the Royal Game of Ur was found in previously uncovered tombs near the Sumerian city-state of Ur. Ur used to be a coastal city sitting on the mouth of the Euphrates River, connecting into the Persian Gulf. However, due to time, the coastline shifted outwards from the city, and Ur is more inland, sitting on the Euphrates' right bank. It was very important as all wealth being imported into Mesopotamia had to come through Ur. This wealth included noble metals like gold and silver, as well as semi-precious like lapis lazuli and carnelian. Interesting enough, it's heavily debated that Ur could have been Ur-Kasdim or Ur of the Chaldees. Ur of the Chaldees was a biblical city stated to be the birthplace of Abraham. Either way, the exact location of Ur of the Chaldees remains a mystery until this day. The excavation that uncovered the Royal Game of Ur was sponsored by the University of Pennsylvania and the British Museum, and it was led by Sir Charles Leonard Woolley around 1925. Woolley was a Magi archaeologist who was well known in the Muggle world for his excavations of Ur. When the curse breakers sent to the royal tombs of the Sumerian city-state came back saying they were safe for excavation, Woolley led a team of both Magi archaeologists and Muggle archaeologists. The team explored over 1,000 tombs, one of them being Queen Puabi's burial chamber. Magical artifacts identified in the tombs were sent back with Magi archaeologists to examine at the Ministry of Magic. Obviously, the Muggle archaeologists were never told they were magical artifacts. Other artifacts found in the tombs are either on display at the British Museum or the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology or Anthropology. Woolley was considered to be one of the first modern archaeologists and was knighted in 1935 for his contribution to the field. All right. So, to come back full circle, Woolley uncovered 5 game boards, 2 sets of 7 pieces per game board, and 6 pyramid-shaped dice in a set. The difference between the game boards were simply the decorations. For example, one was made of conch shells, and another had conch shell plates with engravings of animals on it. All of the game boards had the 5 rosette spaces. One set of pieces were described to have been a light color with 5 dark spots, while the other set was a dark color with 5 light dots. Some of the pieces from other sets were more extravagant. Conch shells with lapis lazuli dots, black slate with conch shell dots, etc. The dice were also quite intriguing. Instead of any numbers, 2 corners of the tetrahedral dice were blank, while the other 2 corners were marked. My personal favorite thing about the game equipment was that the boards had a slide-out drawer on the larger end to store pieces and dice. That meant that not only were the Mesopotamians thinking about a design for a game, they were also thinking of a way to design a board that would keep all of the pieces in one place, which is kind of cool. I agree, that is kind of cool. This also leads us to the interesting question of why are these games in these tombs? Well, the type of tombs they were exploring were most likely either for priests who were sacrificed to the gods, or they were for royalty. Gifts such as the Royal Game of Ur were buried with Sumerian royalty or aristocracy to essentially keep them from getting bored in the afterlife. This game dates back to sometime before 2600 BCE, and other specimens found in tombs date far as back as 3000 BCE. A full set from the excavation is actually on display at the British Museum, which would actually sound like a fun field trip in itself. So here's where I tell all of you how to play the game. I hate to tell you this, but the original rules were lost. However, the shape of the board and the cuneiform tablets that contain rules for the game, they date back to 200 BCE, helped reconstruct some form of rules. The royal game of Ur is actually an ancestor of the tables family, aka backgammon, so it classifies as a race game. There's many different versions of the rules, however. I will teach you the most common one. Take a look at my crudely drawn design, today is not my best day. Take a look at my crudely drawn diagram above. This is a basic game board for the royal game of Ur. There are two sets of pieces, white and black. The yellow line is the path where the white pieces go, and the magenta line is what the black pieces follow. The circles are where both pieces start on the board, and the arrows are where they leave the board. The blue things are the 5 rosette spaces. Back when the game was played, often the rosette spaces added in a gambling feature to the game. Players would bet money or beans. Every time somebody lands on a rosette, they were fined and had to add a small amount of money or beans to a central pot. The winner of the game took their rewards. This is cool because it really shows us that gambling isn't just a modern thing, but that it's been around for a long time. The Royal Game of Ur is a 2-player game. The aim of this game is to get all 7 of your pieces on and off the board before your opponent. You start with all of your pieces off the board. Both players have three tetrahedral dice. There was even an interesting mechanic used to determine which player goes first. One player throws their dice in the air while the other player guesses how the dice will land. There's 2 options. The marked or blank corner will be on top. If the player guesses right, they pick which color of pieces they want, which determines what side of the board they want, and they also get to go first. If you choose to gamble with candy, tokens, beans, etc., this is when you will decide how many pieces of whatever you choose to gamble with to put into the pot at the start. My recommendation is 2 pieces per player, but you may choose whatever number you like. The dice in this game determine whether or not you are able to place a piece on the board, move any pieces, and when your turn is over. During your turn, you roll your 3 dice. To determine what you do on your turn, look at the points at the top of the pyramids. The diagram to the right shows 4 possible combinations that are available. You cannot add a piece onto the board unless your roll determines that you can. If your roll says roll again, obviously you roll again. If you get another combination that says to roll again, your turn continues on and you roll again until you roll the one combination that says to pass the dice. This part can be frustrating depending on your luck, but once you get the hang of it, it's quite fun. Also, when you're rolling dice and you have more than one piece on the board, you can decide which piece you would like to move. Let's take a look back at the board. Notice how you start off with your own squares, and then there's a middle row that you have to share with the other player. The colored-in spaces are called safe squares for the respective player, while the middle row is a combat zone. Combat? Allow me to explain. Only one piece can be on a space at a time, so that if you place a piece on the square that has already occupied the enemy piece, you capture the piece and it's returned to the player. They can't put it back on the board until they roll 3 marked points to place it back on the board. Capturing isn't your goal in this game. Getting all your pieces off the board is. However, capturing is a great way to delay your opponent from reaching their goal. For this last bit, I have the squares numbered as a reference. I keep saying that in order to win, you need to get all your pieces off the board. How do you do that? Well, remember that your piece is placed in square 1 when your roll tells you to place a piece on the board. Whichever side you are on, you take the path that was drawn out earlier. The last space on the board before your piece leaves is square 14. To remove a piece from the board, you need to roll the exact number of points to move it out. So for example, if you are on square 14, then you need to roll 1 unmarked point and 2 marked points, to take your piece off the board. Let's say you're on square 11, which is this one right here. To move your piece off the board from that spot, you need to roll a 4. However, if you roll a 5, that's too many spaces to move it off the board, so your piece has to stay in square 11. Also, when you remove pieces, it's also a good idea to separate your pieces that have completed going through the board from the pieces that you have yet to pass over. Once again, first player that gets all 7 pieces through wins the game, bragging rights, and the gambling pot. Switching gears here, let's talk about Senet. Senet, also spelled Senat or Sint, is a 2-player Egyptian board game that is another ancestor to the tables family, as well as the race category. This game predates the Royal Game of Yore by about 900 years, making it the oldest board game to date. However, the oldest Senet board found is 200 to 300 years younger than the oldest Royal Game of Yore board. Senet was a very popular game within Egyptian society. Pharaohs owned game boards made of expensive wood and ivory. 4 game boards alone were found in the tomb of King Tutankhamun. There were several murals in the tombs of pharaohs that depicted people playing the game, much like the one of Queen Nefertiti on the left. Senet wasn't just popular with the pharaohs, but it was also popular with the common people who couldn't afford these extravagant boards. Boards were drawn in the sand, and people would use stones and clay bits as pieces. Laborers even made Senet boards out of clay to play with while they were on break from building pyramids. There's an example of a Senet board. Senet was known as a game of passing, not only for the symbolic meaning behind the game, but also because the name Senet actually translates to passing. The board itself was seen as a simulation of the netherworld, with certain squares that represent events in the afterlife. Ultimately, the game signals a transition of the spirit towards a new life beyond death. The game is a pretty fun race game of jackals against lions. One player has 5 jackals, while the other has 5 lions. Some games will have 7 or 10 pieces per player, but will stick with 5. The dice here are actually 4 stick dice with 2 faces. This game is similar to the Royal Game of Yore, where you try to get your pieces off the board as fast as possible in order to win. Also, I would like to note that most Senet boards also have a slide-out drawer to keep pieces, and much like the Royal Game of Yore. Once again, we are faced with another game that doesn't have specific rules, so we'll go with the rules proposed by Timothy Condell. R.C. Bell has a completely different set of rules for this game that completely breaks away from the mythological aspect. The game board is divided up into 30 squares that are called houses, as you can see in the diagram to the right. The houses are numbered off in the order they are to show the direction of travel. The pieces start off in the top row 1 through 10, with the lions in the odd-numbered boxes and the jackals in the even-numbered boxes. Houses 15, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30 are special, and the jackals in the and affect your pieces as well as the player's journey through the afterlife. These houses, except for House 15, are safe, and you cannot be attacked if you have a piece on them. House 15 is the House of Rebirth, or the House of Repeating Life. The House of Rebirth usually features an Ankh, and is typically the house your piece gets sent back to if you land in House 27. Some boards do not come with House 15 marked. House 26 is the House of Happiness, or the House of Rejuvenation. This is a mandatory space for all pieces, and they have to stop here before going further. House 27 is the House of Water, or the Waters of Chaos. This house is probably your worst enemy in the game. If you land here, your piece automatically goes back to House 15. If there is no House 15 on your board, you go all the way back to House 1. House 28 is the House of the Three Truths. Your pawn can only leave the board from here if you roll a 3. House 29 is the House of Ra-Atum. This name was a direct reference of a composite deity made up of Ra, the sun god, and Atum, the first god of this world. Your pawn can only leave the board from here if you roll a 2. House 30 is the final square in the game, the House of Ra-Horakhtai. This is a reference to the composite deity of Ra and Horus, the sky god. He was said to rule over all parts of the created world, the sky, earth, and underworld, in later Egyptian dynastic times. Crossing this house with all of your pieces signifies that you completed Senet. In theory, the Egyptians ritually joined with Ra while still alive in order to assure their survival through the trials faced in the underworld. The departure of the pieces from the board represents the deceased passage out of the underworld, unifying with Ra, and eventually deifying their spirit. Senet uses cylindrical stick dice. This essentially means that there's one flat side and one rounded side. If you don't have these dice, you can also take 4 popsicle sticks and color one side. There are 5 possible results from the dice rolls. 1 flat side up equals 1, 2 flat sides up equals 2, 3 flat sides up equals 3, 4 flat sides up equals 4, and 4 rounded sides up equals 6. In order to determine who starts the game, players take turns rolling the dice until someone gets a 1. The player who does begins the game and uses the jackals. The pieces move in a path according to how the houses are numbered. If you look back at the diagram from earlier, a piece moving from house 10 would move to house 11, not house 20. Having said that, obviously a piece in house 20 would likewise move into house 21 and not house 30. The points from that roll determines how many spaces you can move your pieces. Where was I? I'm sorry. Since the first player rolled a 1, they get to move their jackal out of house 10 into house 11 to start the game. That same player rolls again and moves their jackals according to the number of spaces. If they rolled a 1, 4, or 6, they continue rolling. If they roll a 2 or a 3, then they move their jackal and that officially ends their turn. The second player must move their lion out of house 9 from the first roll, and then they can decide which lion they will play next. Only one piece can occupy a house at a time. However, you can jump over other pieces to get to an empty spot depending on the dice roll. If the player cannot advance a piece forward, they have to move one of their pieces backwards. If the player is unable to move their pieces at all, then they lose a turn. If you roll a number that lands you on a space occupied by your opponent's piece, you can capture it. The captured piece will then trade places with your piece. Obviously, you can't do this with your own pieces, and it would be kind of pointless to do so. Although 2 of any piece can't occupy the same house, you can have 2 pieces sit in side by side in adjacent houses. This prevents the opponent from capturing those 2 pieces. Give me one moment. Alright. This prevents the opponent from capturing those 2 pieces, but they can still jump over them. If you line up 3 pieces side by side in adjacent houses, this forms a block. Your opponent cannot attack or move past the block. However, this does not hinder your movement, and your pieces can easily jump the block. You can see these in yet another crudely drawn diagram by yours truly. Obviously not myself. The yellow paw prints are the lions forming a block. The burgundy spikes are the jackals preventing the lions from capturing them. Although technically the jackal in house 26, this one here, cannot get captured, this provides some type of temporary immunity for the piece in house 25. Last but not least, I would like to mention that you cannot begin removing your pieces from the board until all of them are in the last row, 21 through 30. In the case that your opponent captures one of your pieces in the last row after you started moving it, or if you land on house 27, you cannot continue moving your pieces off the board until your dead piece gets back on the last row. Like I mentioned earlier, the first player who removes all their pieces wins. Now you know the basics for both the Royal Game of Year and Sunset, or Sonnet. Feel free to try them out at your desks with your partner. I also included a fun little extra credit assignment today where you get to design your own rules for either games. Tomorrow we will be dealing with Patoli and Pachisi as well as a wonderful surprise guest. Alright everyone, I am going to try to have the next video up today. Keep watching. If you like it, please like and subscribe. And I will see y'all in the next video.